Jobs is like, it sucks you have to work that hard.
Yeah. Well, I think they both worked as hard.
Yeah.
But just, it's a difference.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Buffett doesn't even give.
Yeah. And then the second bit is people just flock to jobs. And you can't logically understand fucking why. And then he beats you in the exam for 12 years straight. And you just, fuck it.
I don't think he's an evil guy.
No, and he's adding them all together. He's like, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And then, bro, it looks like you've just bought the whole supply chain.
G'day everyone, welcome to Sci-Fi, where we delve into psychology and find out some interesting things about interesting people. Tom, how you both doing?
Pretty good.
How are you?
So I'll get stuck straight into this week. Carl Jung. What do we know about Carl Jung, Tom?
More importantly, I've liked the random advertisements I get on these weird psychologist pages. It follows no pattern whatsoever. Why do I want to buy a tape measure from Bunnings when I'm reading about Jung?
Why don't the Americans have zinger burgers? That's a more important topic.
Maybe it's just your advertising habits. They just think that you're just a tape measure guy.
Oh, I am a bit of a fixer.
What have you been searching?
I like building things.
It is remarketing, so whatever you've been looking at.
Pandora. I don't even own any Pandora.
It's linked.
God, I don't understand how this world works. What's this? Spotify makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother psychology thing for another time about advertising retargeting.
Carl Jung. Well, learning my lesson from last week. He has an interesting childhood that directly relates to a lot of the work that he did in his psychological findings.
Mm-hmm.
So, Switzerland, grew up in the 30s, 40s, 50s, well, 20s, 30s, 40s. Bit of a distressed mother and a very religious pastor as a father in a impoverished family, let's say that. Which is interesting because he then goes on a lot to talk about ancestral shared memory and shared consciousness. So he's clearly got, and a lot about symbology actually, and how the human race is very similar. So he's got a lot of influence from his father's religious beliefs and symbology, but watching his mother do weird things and obviously be a little bit distressed with her brain works and trying to understand what's going on with that. And I like that he's at school and they talk about him having two personalities at school, like the classic schoolboy and then the distinguished intellect, which I found interesting. Some of the stuff that I like about him is most people know he worked very closely in the early days with Freud, but then really diverged in their thinking quite dramatically. So the two things that I really like about Jung is the shared consciousness idea and the ancestral shared being. So you have things from past ancestors ingrained in you at a conscious or a subconscious level that forms part of who you are and how you act, actually, which I think is incredibly interesting. And that he definitely believes that your behavior is a direct cause of both your past experience and your future aspirations. Whereas Freud was very much its past experience, in particular, how you grew up as a child, and therefore, your underlying sexual subconscious traits. So I feel like in that regard, Jung was a little bit more progressive. The other thing that I like is the way that he talks about the archetypes. So there's this concept of archetypes where you have your persona, which is the outward-facing version of yourself. You have yourself, which is the real version of yourself, and not many people know much about that. And then you have the dark side, which is a bunch of other underlying traits that are counter to yourself. So, there's a few other things we'll talk about, but they're the things that I found interesting that relate to what we do.
Military doctor as well. Another person who'd served.
Just that era, they were always tied to something military, like World War II.
The military allows you to, whatever side you're on, see the difference between chaos and order. Which is where Sigmund and Freud and Carl Jung stopped talking to each other. So Sigmund Freud, I don't think we talked about him yet, have we?
We haven't done Freud
yet.
There's a whole Netflix show on Freud now. I'm watching that.
Father of psychoanalysts.
Yeah, and Carl Jung was like his Sith apprentice, or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
And then they stopped talking to each other. The reason they stopped talking to each other was a fundamental difference on sexual drive in your psychology. Like a really, really simple way of putting it, I don't know, I think it's called the Oedipal myth, or it's something similar, where the dude gets the misunderstanding of his sexual drive and kills his father and marries his mother. And that's the actual failure of it. Like, you're breaking the laws, and then
laws.
all of the psychology that then cripples you unconsciously from that is really bad. Which means that Freud sort of says that everyone is this unconscious beast that's driven by libido. And if you develop a positive relationship with the same-sex parent rather than using your attraction to the opposite sex parent, which is really, when you think about it, constrained, you're successful in building your character or your temperament, or however you want to consider you becoming your whole self. Whereas Carl Jung was really interesting because he goes, nuts, it's way older than that. So what does that mean if it's way older than that? It means that if you think about, if you've ever read any of Carl Jung's books, everything is about things like archetypes, or words like animus, or words like, if you ever played Assassin's Creed, animus, you go back in time looking into your DNA, think about that for a second. What he's saying is that your actual foundational becoming conscious is built off the idea that combines not only your biology, it combines your neurology, and it combines your personality or an experience. So all of those things come together, but none of those things are sexual. And what that means is that if you read a lot of, well, what it means in the first instance, the reason why they stopped talking to each other was this. One of them hated religion, and the other one didn't hate religion. One of them found religion as the Bible of psychology before people really wrote anything down other than just the stories. So, and Carl Jung is a firm believer that the ideal of Christ, right, which is the judge in the New Testament, he is a firm believer that the Revelations book got added because there was too much positivity and never anything about the dragon. Why does this all make sense? The real simple way of putting it is that Carl Jung pretty much says that you are in complete control of you becoming conscious, and that journey is the hero journey, and that journey is the same journey that's been repeated across thousands and thousands and thousands of years, which is you can constantly choose between going around in this circle where you can upgrade and address the dragon, fight it, and establish order, then go into chaos again, learn from your mistake, and then grow again. And that's where they fundamentally differed. Whereas the other guy said...
Yeah, Freud was more like, your path is set based on how you were brought up.
Well, I think there's no real difference. This is why I think, and this is what I'll finish it really quickly because it's getting too complex, and I don't know enough. But the simple thing is that Freud diagnosed the problem. Jung established a long, old way of possibly solving the problem that you can solve yourself without it speaking to a psychiatrist, and then related it to all of these texts that already said it. So some of the things that Freud says are really, you'll find in philosophy. You'll find across history, and you'll find all these things. Now, what does that mean, though? It means he wasn't famous.
Well, yeah, that was one of the defining things, wasn't it?
People don't fucking understand him.
Can't understand it. Yeah.
And if you've got it's like the we have now, right? We go bring it back to us. Everyone knows what a job board company does.
Yeah.
No one can understand what the hell we're doing, which is creating jobs, which is the actual problem.
Yeah.
And the job board company will probably be known in history.
I can just imagine if Carl Jung had to start a website, it would be the most complicated website as opposed to Freud's.
Probably the most effective, though.
Well, the real interesting thing is when it relates to his personality, the guy was an introverted visionary. So, he's also not going to get up and big note himself. But, someone like most, I would say, psychoanalysts avoid Carl Jung still, because Sigmund Freud it's the real thing. But he's just identifying the problem. Whereas, effectively the way Jung describes his consciousness was, I know that both my parents were just fallible and human, so the mist is released, and I work out that I am also fallible and human. And I realized that at age 11. I tell you, when I realized it, I didn't realize it till age 25. So really, really simple. All those other things that I did in my life, although complex and chaotic, didn't help me realize it. Here's where I realized it. When my legs didn't want to play the game and I didn't want to live anymore, no one came to help. My parents that were infallible don't know what to do. So then I had to get myself through it. And then once I got myself through it, they would say things like, "I'll just run it off." Or, "How's your cute little lemonade shop business going?" So all of a sudden you're seeing them as humans and not as figures. And that was like 25. And then all of a sudden then you could improve your development. So what am I getting to? I'm a firm believer in Carl Jung's theory.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think I like the link to biology. Biology always says what can happen will happen, and he's talking about the shadow side, which is your animal instincts that you can revert to, but you don't really know why you have those instincts. No one trained you in those instincts. You didn't, you might have learned some of them from your experiences growing up, but fundamentally they sit inside yourself from how we are put together.
Yeah, like, so if you take say the three concepts where you've got your shadow integration, your shadow that drives you, right? That's the full. Like, that's all. Like, why'd you fucking do that?
That's right. He uses that terminology of like negative.
Yeah,
and
I just did it. What do you mean?
Yeah.
What did you jump off the bridge for? Well, everyone else was jumping off the bridge, and I just felt natural to jump off the bridge. And then you got the animus. So they're a very thing. Like, so if I think in the animus, me and all of my mum's brothers are exactly the same. So I just have to avoid what they made, and you can see why we're the same. And then you talk about the archetype. Well, based off becoming conscious early and having a problem that you can aim at, the archetype and becoming more conscious is sort of happening naturally.
I think I like how he links to future aspiration too. Like, if you don't have the ability at your stage in life to think about where you want to be, it can limit your ability to enhance the skills that you have. We're talking psychologically, like mentally.
Yeah. The other thing about Carl Jung, he comes from a whole family of visionaries. So
yeah. It links back to really basic things in self-help guides that people don't really understand where they come from, like setting goals. Like, setting goals is a
the
real
Simon Sinek
arbitrary way of...
The Simon Sinek phenomenon was pretty interesting about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Where it went from, start with why, which is pretty much, if you have something to aim at, then be the hero and go on the journey. But the next, he sort of ran out of content. So he started to meet all these veterans that were all like, and he's aware enough. Like, if you think about his time span, he's probably sitting at like 5. He's aware enough to see that these dudes are more psychologically developed.
The veterans.
Yeah. And this is what their actual problem is with integrating. They're more psychologically developed. And that doesn't mean their aptitude is sky high. Everyone, like, stop thinking that's the sort of thought. But why are they more psychologically developed? Well, they were from a better tribe. Why does the tribe work that way? And then everything that he does is just like a fucking pulls apart all of the symbols, and you bring it back, and it's just the same story again, right? It's the same journey. They just accelerate your hero challenge, hero full challenge, hero full challenge journey again and again and again, until you hit like a quantum and you can't do it anymore.
How do you think this concept of the shadow, as in the personality that you have, your alter ego, which you have to choose to be evil or not evil, do you think people need to be aware of that? And do people think people are conscious of it?
It's not necessarily evil. It's between order and chaotic. They're two different things.
Yeah, evil's quite extreme.
Yeah.
So, like, which you can do chaotic things that someone could say was done in malice, which would then make it quite evil. But the way I would describe is what I just did. For me, it's the hero and the fool. That's the same thing. And you've seen me be the fool on the piss, and then I guess a composed hero in a board meeting if I need to be. They're very different people. They're almost two different people. I also talk to between the two of them. That's probably a problem.
So actually, on the piss is a good example, because your question is like, do people realize?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a group of people who don't realize that that's a thing.
until they get
Then
drunk.
they get on the piss, but that's who they are, and it kind of comes out, right? Because your persona drops.
Well,
and
that's just the chaos persona.
That's right. But then there are people that are aware of it who go, I could do this, but that would be chaotic. Maybe I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then there's probably people that I do want to do that, and are consciously chaotic.
And I think the idea is you have to bring them as close together as possible.
How much?
Well, yeah.
How much do you think of all those concepts came from Carl Jung's own childhood? I think he's probably, of everyone that we've looked at, he's the most reflective of his childhood and understands consciously all these small, insignificant events in a lot of people's lives, like when he got pushed over at school and how that helped influence his whole
The dude came out of the Matrix at like 11.
It's true.
Like, who the fuck? Like, so obviously he's a very, very intelligent person. Like, well, he had a highly chaotic mother and a highly orderly father that was also visionary, which is quite interesting. It's very hard to have an orderly person, right? So if you think of super orderly people, they don't look that far ahead. They're too busy organizing everything. Whereas disorderly people generally think far ahead and get lost in their imagination. And one of the interesting things is that he goes, well, every child has a better relationship with their mother, but because of a whole bunch of things, but she's super chaotic. So I had a better connection with my father, which is a pretty interesting comment. So his concept of order and chaos was played out in front of him. But in order for him to be that visionary, both parents were probably highly visionary with long time spans, which means he saw the creative genius likely within his mother at certain points that was also reflected in his father. So if both people have creative geniuses and both people are orderly, like I can be super orderly if I want to. It freaks Chelsea out, right? It really freaks her out. I can organize things.
That's your wife, yeah.
It freaked Ben Hughes out when I organized a whole unit cost in 5 seconds for a customer that had about 18 different cost lines. So how did you do that?
And that's our finance guy.
Yeah,
who's very orderly.
But like that's the thing though. So then you start to realize that maybe everyone can be both, and everyone is both. So I think that sort of foundationally made it pretty obvious. And because he was conscious early, the idea of having sexual drives removed is pretty interesting. The other idea that's really interesting is he sort of backed the stories of religion, but maybe not religion itself. So one of the things that's really interesting is...
Well, I think he backed the actual underlying stories.
So it's stories,
yeah.
So one of the things, like, so he ingrained that the story, like religion was initially set up not to be pathological.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a huge, huge difference in what people think religion is. It was the ability to share stories that crossed over time. And if you read the books like end to end, like it's pretty, like for the Bible, for example, it's pretty fucking. There's a lot of elemental truths or archetypes that you see playing out again and again and again, and that's why they're still around to this day. But you can see things that like the Freud thing that's had an aspect on religion and stuff. But yeah,
I like the stuff about the family. I would say that. So aside from like a lot of people do like, how did I end up the way that I am? So he's definitely done that. But I reckon he's also done, why did my parents end up the way they are? And if you ask the same set of questions about how did my dad grow up? How did my mum grow up? And you're looking back ancestrally like that as well, that also impacts on how you have turned out. That's another level of not looking forward, like time span wise, but trying to really figure out 3 layers back why you ended up the way you were.
Yeah. So he didn't look back at all, which what Sigmund Freud would do. He looked forward. So if you read any of his books, and I've tried to read one, I can't read it, you'll notice that he's like, well, here's a human story. And everyone will be like, oh. It's like stand-up comedians. Oh, yeah, like that makes sense. And he goes, and there's the problem. And then here's the solution. Like the guy's level of thinking was he could, and one of the interesting concepts of him compared to other one else, especially a visionary, firm believer in using lucid dreams and talking to people when you lucid dreams. So, i.e., speaking to your conscious and subconscious or unconscious was a healthy thing to do to understand why you're doing it. And some of the interesting stories about it are like helping people in treatment, clinical treatment, and helping them go into dreams and then speak to things in their dreams rather than avoid them is pretty interesting.
What do you both think of the way that modern psychology has taken on some of Jung's theories? So the best example, I think, is looking at his personas and talking about it as
Myers-Briggs. Yeah.
and we can talk about introverts and extroverts, but let's talk about the Myers-Briggs side of things.
Yeah, he talks about that thinking, feeling, whatever it was.
Sensing,
Extended
judging.
disc is the best version.
Well, I think it comes back to your point about people really didn't understand it. So he's probably one of the more republished psychologists where people have taken his work and kind of retranslated into a palatable way, or maybe extended some of the research. Yeah.
So like extended disc is the best version of a link. Why? People like when you do your standard disc training, which is putting you as a dominant, compliant, influence, or steady personality, right? Effectively, you can be whipped around. People go, well, you have one at home and you have one at work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so what you're seeing is that you're seeing, if I was taking this test at home, this is what I'm like. If I'm taking this test as I integrate with society, this is what I'm like. For me, it's the same test. Like, I get the same. I'm the same. Like, it even shows you in the test if you're in either circumstance, if you're at home. That's a sort of take on your unconscious bias when you do that assessment. And I think you've got to drive them to be the same person, and that person's a rounded person. But to me, that was the biggest standout thing. Like, if you think of, all right, how many introverted visionaries are there? Super low extroversion, super high openness to experience. Carl Jung. Doesn't happen. So the guy's obviously dealt with his own problems and then become this rounded individual that can do it. So he also applies everything he does to himself before sort of sharing it out. So for me, like, so if you bring in the big five into it, maybe there's components of your big five that don't make sense that you have to work on. And it's called improving your temperament. And that's what temper is, right? And for the disorderly creatives, they have to improve their conscientiousness and lower their neuroticism. For the orderly doers, they have to increase their openness to experience and likely increase their agreeableness if they're disagreeable, because otherwise nothing ever gets done.
What about how his stuff plays into your answering the test based on your persona, which is your outward-facing self, as opposed to your intrinsic self?
Well, this is what we talked about before.
And it's kind of how you create the tests.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of why they create the test in a fashion that's like, answer the questions really quick.
And they ask the same question 4 different ways.
Yeah, because they're trying to get around that. But it works in reverse in the sense that if you are actually quite in tune with both of those selves, you can get a really true result and really identify things that you can work on and grow.
What about the idea of introversion extroversion? So his theory of introverts and extroverts was one of the first that came out, but is very different to what you consider the modern theories of introversion extroversion.
I don't know the difference.
Yeah, so what he talks about is that introverts are people that look at the world subjectively, whereas extroverts are those that look at it objectively. So the idea of what, Tom, you were saying of a introverted visionary probably aligns, and there'll be a lot more people that you consider introverted based off of his theories, not off of the modern day theory of introversion.
Yeah, like, do I need to speak to anyone? No. To be honest, I don't speak to anyone when I get home. I don't speak outside of when I need to, and most of it's a conversation with myself about ideas. So if that's what he means, then you would count me an introvert.
Well, you've always considered yourself an introvert. Yeah. Yeah. But your persona is an extrovert.
But if I did the big five test, it's highly extroverted.
Yeah.
So maybe the test was wrong.
Is that because you want that test result, though?
No.
Because it's part of the persona?
No, I made sure I did my test drunk. No, I did.
I'm laughing because it's true. Yeah.
No, I made sure I did my test drunk. And the reason is, otherwise I'm not going to answer it properly. I'm going to game it. So I did drunk.
You know too much about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, I don't know. Drunk Tom's highly extroverted. There you go.
That's true. It's true.
And highly disagreeable. And still highly conscientious. I can fucking drink like 42 beers.
There is a point where you become quite agreeable, but you're pretty drunk by that point.
Disagreeable, you mean?
No, agreeable. It's right before you pass out.
Is there anything else you want to add on Freud before we move on?
You mean?
Jung.
Jung. I don't know. I've been a big fan of him. I think if people haven't done any research into him whatsoever, it's worth a look because I think there's some really interesting stuff, and I've always liked the biology stuff. And he talks a lot about that. Whereas I feel like Freud was, at the end of the day, just a little bit.
Should we do Freud next week?
Super fruit. Maybe we should do Freud. Yeah.
He speaks in deep stories.
Yeah. Jung. Yeah.
Have you seen there's a Netflix show about Freud?
I haven't watched
drama?
it, but I did see that. Yeah, yeah. A drama.
No, the thing I like,
It's a really bad dub.
the thing I like
a-
about him,
yeah,
is
Austrian.
he pulls humanity above its animal and sexual main reason for their psychological traits.
Yeah, maybe that's why I like him because he says you have
Like,
more control.
There is way more control.
Yeah.
You have way more control of your consciousness, and I think your comments about neurology is only going to help strengthen
Yeah, some of his
Jung's
research.
arguments over Freud's.
Yeah, and they said there's a heap of stuff that hasn't even really been published of his works that they
Well,
haven't even got
one
to.
of the interesting things he says in one of his last interviews, he's like, "I'm not going to publish my Sigmund letters."
Yeah. Savage.
Well, no, I think the guy was so smart that he realized that he would look better than Sigmund, and he didn't want to destroy someone that taught him a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe Sigmund's ego got in the way, and that's how smart the guy was.
Yeah.
We need to analyze these mentor-mentee relationships between psychologists. Because like Mihai, who we discussed last week, says he got all of his stuff from Jung, and they had a very close relationship.
Yeah.
But then at
It's
some
just
point, they always diverge.
Well, that makes sense though, because Mihal was very into the other states of consciousness, which was flow.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, question then: how do you think Bill Gates reacts with his shadow?
Fucking terrible. Oh no, I don't know.
Well,
Bill Gates is an interesting guy. I was just saying to Tom, I think no one really likes Bill Gates. Like you never see like an article about I like Bill Gates. This is what I learned from Bill Gates. Go on Quora. Bill Gates was this great leader that taught me all these things. You've even got ones on Bezos of it in there. Now, then you're like, oh well. Then I thought, oh well, he has that little weird relationship with Warren Buffett, but that might just say a little bit more about Warren Buffett. Back to my last podcast where I was sort of losing it about it. But I don't think anyone likes Bill Gates.
Yeah.
It's odd that you can have that much money, right, and have built one of these huge companies, and no one really ever talks about you. My dad has this like weird like radar when it comes to people, and I remember growing up. I mean, like 11, and he was talking about someone. And he goes, fucking Bill Gates. Never gives anyone any money. Someone threatens to kill him. Now he's paying everyone off. And like, so there was this sort of moment in Bill Gates where he gets, I don't know if you've seen him get caked.
yeah.
And then he realizes, because he was walking around arrogantly about how rich he was and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, and everyone's like, well, why is everyone hating on Bill Gates right now? Well, because I don't think anyone's ever liked him, even if he's trying to do good. Or he's not. But then you sent me this argument, Luke, about how he wanted to reestablish the schooling system. And the idea and concepts of driving community-based schooling is quite novel, or just looking at history, it could work quite well. But then he had everything defined right down to the detail and no creativity in any of the organizations. So none of it worked. And then when it stopped working, do you know what?
He just moved on.
See you later.
Well, so this is the bit that I think frustrates me all the time is he's got all of these projects now that he's trying to do, not really having a defining impact on any one of them. And when you think back to his business and you compare it to some of the other greats that we've talking about, it's kind of the same. Like, yeah, it was a big successful business, but it didn't really have a defining impact on humanity. Not that that's the measure for success or anything, but like
It did, Excel and Word. But
yeah, but not the same way that like Apple did. Like
Well,
it changed how
but they
people's
didn't-
behavior.
So remember though, it's an interesting company, right?
Yeah.
Remember they were making operating systems and chips.
Yeah.
For other computer companies. So they never actually. The best way to think of it is that I don't think Bill Gates has ever made a finished product
Yeah, maybe.
because none of those products are finished. And if they are finished, they're just a replication of someone else's. So like if you think about it, he doesn't see it through this school. Like what else hasn't he seen through? So the real question is, when he's going in this Carl Jung hero journey, when it gets tough, does he go through it? Does he try to smite all the dragons? Does he avoid the dragon? Does he try to trick the dragon by being the fool? I'd suggest he tries to trick the dragon by being the fool.
The one that didn't sit well with me was all the medical research stuff he was doing in third world countries to try and solve some global diseases, but also bypassing a lot of the rules around how you can test certain things on humans by paying off governments to be allowed to do it. And I was like, there's this weird, like, I don't know if you're doing it for the right reason.
I just think he has this complex where he thinks he's smarter than everyone else.
Maybe, yeah.
But reading all the articles, there's never anything that talks about this is Bill Gates' vision and this is what he's been able to achieve. I'd say 90% of the articles that talk about Bill Gates is about how rich he is. I remember, like, when I was a kid growing up and you'd watch him on The Simpsons, it was always just references to his wealth. It was never references to what he'd done, which I think actually drives him to try to do things. Like, I felt that's why he does the education things, because he wants to actually do something that people remember him for, but he's just not very successful at it.
Maybe he's a little bit like still searching for the thing and he never quite got it.
No, I think he has that concept where he needs to be accepted. So I'm going to make a lot of money to be accepted. Doesn't get accepted.
Didn't work.
Now I'm going to try to do these other things to be accepted. Doesn't be accepted. And what it really is stop worrying about being accepted and pick a goal, aim at it, and accomplish it, and finish it. That's what I think. But in saying that, and like you only have to look at some of the, like every education play. Like the Americans need to improve their education system. That's what pretty much like one of his big strategies. Like we need to improve education. But then he puts the same metrics on it, like the data metrics, like a computer.
Yeah.
On childhood metrics but it's the old metrics. So he hasn't innovated the metrics, which means you're not like you think about the production line metrics, how they change. Right? Not changing the metrics based off where they are. Like one of the best way so there was this school in the US that had a really low graduation rate, like less than 10%, low income school. What the principal worked out was like, all of these kids are in single parent families. So they either have to work a service job at night or look after kids. So they can't do anything with their hands. So all of our homework doesn't work. So what he did was he took the whole school year's curriculum and made the teachers, right? Record it.
Yeah.
So they could listen and watch it. And then, you know what he did during the day? Rather than teach classes, they'd come to the classes and the teachers would work one-on-one where people got stuck and couldn't understand it. Mate, they went from like 15% to 86%. Like, that's a huge change. But that's like, all right, we're going to fund you to change your schools. The metrics we want to improve graduation, one metric, how do you do it? That's it. Like, because the idea of a school is so complex with so many other things that can affect it.
Yeah. So there was that doco on Bill Gates on Netflix. The only thing that I really liked about it was, I think it was on Netflix, he reads a lot, right? But if you are really low in openness to experience, but really intelligent, you read a lot, you're looking for answers. You're not trying to apply what you're reading to future ideas and concepts.
You're not questioning anything you're reading.
So he never gets to root cause of problems because he's not creative. So it's like he's looking for answers to his problems in all of the books, as opposed to reading and thinking about what the answers are.
What do you think his time span is?
It's huge, man. It's
the time span's about your ability to solve unpredictable problems. So I think it's quite long. That's very different from having a unique idea.
His time span is long, but he hasn't got any abstract reason. Or maybe some. I don't know. The guy's an odd guy. Like, I just don't understand how you can do those things and still everyone hate you. And the only question I can put on it is you always think you're right, or you take other people's ideas, or you've got your money doing things that people would think are unethical.
How much do you think of that is kind of the media persona of him? Like, has nobody really told the proper story, or is the story not there?
We keep trying to tell the proper story. You see that he's like him just running around. Like,
yeah.
He's got his own website.
Yeah.
Gates Notes.
So I think,
and there's a reference to like almost like a religion term. Was it like Gatesian or something? Yeah,
he's a terrible storyteller. Like really bad.
I don't think he builds meaningful relationships easily at all.
And he doesn't care for them.
Yeah.
That's why it's never worked.
Yeah.
So you can say, well, he didn't buy a media company to improve his image.
Yeah.
I think
Well, it's the same thing of like, all right, you need a media company to improve your image. The dude with the biggest media company in the world, everyone hates him. Murdoch. Because he's the same thing. I don't care about people. I care about me.
Oh, there's actually a line here that says that Gates is notorious for not being reachable by phone or returning phone calls. You talk about some of the other people who've talked on this podcast, like Rupert Murdoch at News Corp, Warren Buffett, Amazon and Jeff Bezos, Jobs and Apple. Could you imagine any of them, actively leaving those organizations? Whereas, what do you think it is about Bill Gates that just made him step away from Microsoft?
He probably doesn't want to be on a sinking ship.
Or he like didn't have another idea. So to my
Well,
point, like he'd optimized it.
He just said that he wanted to focus on his philanthropic work. That was the official reason he gave.
Well, Microsoft's like, what's the defining Microsoft product?
Office.
It's like MS-DOS. That was Microsoft.
That was
Now it's Office. They didn't make the jump to the internet. Bing hasn't really worked. They couldn't beat Google.
Internet Explorer is shit.
They haven't beat Apple. They own a substantial market share, but they really just took IBM's.
I reckon he just got tired. He's like, I've done all this and I'm just never going to get there.
Well, I think he has a habit of, this is what I think. It comes back to like being at school. You study your ass off to do this test and you nail the multiple choice. You nail the multiple choice. You nail your short answers because they're pretty logical. And then you get to the critical thinking piece. But the critical thinking piece is worth 80%. So you've got young fucking old mate sitting here, Bill Gates, who knows every iteration of multiple choice and every iteration of short answer, but he's written 3 million articles, right, to get to the critical thinking sort of piece. And then you've got Jobs. Doesn't study, turns up, guesses the multiple choice, gets like half right, goes in, probably gets like 8 out of 10 for the short answers, and then just gets 100% for his critical thinking that he's not studied and written. And this comes just like, he's on 99 and he's on 97. And he's just like, what the fuck? That is the definition of this dude's life playing out. But if he understands, but he doesn't respect him.
Yeah.
Or I would say in the case of Bill Gates, he respected him too late. Right? Which is...
Didn't realize it was another version of intelligence and genius. Yeah.
But this guy does.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the interesting thing because the only times...
Jobs is like, it sucks you have to work that hard.
Yeah. Well, I think they both worked as hard.
Yeah.
But just, he didn't think that someone sitting there thinking or speaking to customers or spending time on Quaaludes was working. But it was.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between those guys and the rest of the world, though. So, like, you've got to think about it. Even Bill, like, how can someone rebuild the education sector, right? Not use technology to build it, to do it, which is really odd because you would think that he would provide a tech approach to it. Yeah, like, fucking. And he left. He didn't go to university. He got into the best schools. He left. So Bill Gates is an unusual dude. Like, he's a creative person, not super abstract, but smart enough to know that a lot of the rules and systems don't work. But he has to experience them to see them. So he had to get into the university to go, this isn't worth my time. Whereas Jobs just realized, it's not worth my time, so I'm just going to whatever class I want, and I'm just doing it for the experience, and I'm going to build this, and this, and I'm like, I'm just going to take calligraphy, or I'm just going to, like... So it's a really interesting conundrum because you've never had two people that are so smart, that are so different in the same industry at once. And I'd
say it probably hasn't happened.
I would say,
again.
You're probably completely right. And then you think about it, they sort of learn off each other to a certain point. Like Microsoft has gotten way better at branding, way better at design than it used to be. It used to be really clunky, didn't want to help anyone. But they both...
The approach to those problem solving was different, though.
So, like, the problem solving, and this is where I think Bill Gates, his biggest positivity is unraveled. Everything about Microsoft was always open source. The reason it was always open source is that's how engineers think. I learn a hard lesson, I'm going to share a hard lesson. That's actually his most positive quality. And people have always missed it. They never talk about that. Like, that was the fundamental aspect of Microsoft that played to a certain part of the market, which means your gamers, your modders, your hackers could all build on. And then Jobs is like, nah, I'm building a Ferrari. I'm not building a sedan that you can modify. And my closed world is better than yours. The cool thing about this, but he worked out status symbols. So if I have a closed society, people will pay more for it and I earn more money. So you can argue then, well, maybe you played business wrong.
Gates went the volume.
Well, Gates went, I actually want to bring computers to maybe everyone. Jobs is like, I want to bring computers to everyone, but only if they're as cool as me.
Yeah.
Now, that's always missed in the discussion. Did the guy have to build a business? Yes. Was the business profitable like all the time?
Yeah.
Yes. Apple wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? Did he make big bets? Not really. Somewhat he would consider he has. Now, I would say that him losing that game has probably shaken his fucking confidence, like it's going out of fashion. And probably he's always tried to become more creative, but he's always done the superficial thing. Like, I'm going to do the big product announcement, or I'm going to change the colors. That's not what the creative was.
Yeah.
The creative is that anyone in Apple is a company where the best ideas win. And they fucking argue ferociously with each other. That doesn't happen at Microsoft. Everything at Microsoft is
structured,
orderly, clerical, almost like a fucking monastery. And
Gatesism.
Well, yeah. Well, my point is, I don't necessarily think he's a bad person. I think he has the same problem as probably Murdoch, which is in the school ground. If you keep doing that and people just flock to Jobs and you can't logically understand fucking why, and then he beats you in the exam for 12 years straight and you just, fuck it. You're going to go two lanes. One, I'm going to control everything, which is what I would suggest Gates has probably done. And if you're controlling everything, you're not going through that journey where you're constantly learning. So rather than seeing the education stuff through and going, well, what did we do wrong? Doubling down on it. Well, maybe this isn't the problem for me because I'm not the one that fucked up. All these other people fucked up. You just didn't do what I said. And if you think about Gates, that's pretty much who he is. So if you think about what our concept is today about having creative ideas and having the hero journey and having parts of your psychology you can control, I think the best way of describing it is that Gates always was building himself against other people, not building himself.
So I think that's right, because I think all the things that I think about for him are system related. I don't think he can impact culture.
Yeah.
Jobs impacted culture. So it's like Musk is impacting culture.
Yep.
Even though he's an engineer. So I would say that Bill Gates is a translator in our terminology, and he can look at systems and understands how systems are supposed to be improved and interact, and he's an analyst and an engineer. But I don't think he's got high openness to experience, and I don't think he cares about people enough from an EQ point of view to understand culture.
I think but it's like that. He never realized that he was conscious, and it's not based off his past, which is Sigmund Freud, right?
Because now he's in this point where he wants to have big impact, and he has no idea how to have it.
Yeah. And then the second, but he's better than Buffett though, because he's trying. This is a difference.
Well, I was gonna say Buffett doesn't even give.
And then the second bit is, well, I'm going to keep shooting. So Jobs highly neurotic, highly extroverted, becomes more introverted, becomes less neurotic, becomes a composed CEO, right? Gates is just sort of doing this. And what that means is that you're comparing yourself against other people, but by the time you're 30, no matter who you are, you can't do that anymore. You can't compare yourself against anyone at 30. Your life is so different to everyone else that if you're not conscious by 30, then you're never going to get out of chaos. So my read is that this guy, they were both extraordinarily wealthy by the time they were 30. And one guy lost his company at 30. The other guy didn't lose his company at 30. This guy made him assess who he really was and then changed like a billion times. This dude just sort of kept getting mandated, but no one was really telling him the truth.
I think that was it's not a coincidence that he became the richest person in the world, because he probably used that as his barometer for success. and drove him to do
Yeah.
so. And now
Well,
he's
it's
at a
like-
point in life where he's the richest man in the world. He doesn't know what to do because the barometer of success is what's the impact you've had, and he's trying to get to that point.
The easiest way to think about it is just like this brings back to him and then comparing himself against people.
Mm.
Microsoft isn't the richest place in the world. He's the richest man. Apple is one of the richest companies in the world. Jobs wasn't one of the richest men.
Significant, yeah.
Huge difference, right? And if you look at it right now, Bezos, richest man in the world. But like, so his share value's gone up, and then cool's gone. Whereas you've got like, it's very interesting when you see that.
If I try to bring it back to Jung, I think Gates has been so focused on his environment and how to shape his success around his environment, but nowhere near as focused on his self and how people work.
Yeah.
Jobs was all about how people work.
But I think he was focused on himself in the context of someone else.
So his persona, maybe like his outward persona
Like
and his ego, as opposed to his actual.
He's always focusing on someone else.
Yeah.
Rather than just going, well, that didn't work. And then he's like, well, maybe it did work. I'm the richest man in the world. So like, it's the thing is, but that's not, the money's not the thing. And this is the difference between stop looking at the past, which is Freud, and start looking at the future, which is Jung. And you can be you can have multiple personalities, and one of those personalities can be a visionary introvert or a common extrovert, right? So think of it this way. When I'm on the piss, I can talk about anything, and I can speak with the most common person. I was quite fortunate enough to grow up in a low socioeconomic area to develop that ability, right? But if I'm at a table with a whole bunch of smart people, I can be an introverted visionary. It's like when you speak, sometimes my speeches are bang on because when I speak to a bunch of veterans, I can go, this is the real huge concept, but this is how it affected me as a soldier. It's enter swear phrase, right? That's two different people. So I don't know. I think that may be what it is. I don't know. Like, I don't think the guys that like the real question is it that deep ingrained, which is he's focusing on his ego and how other people view him? Is he spending money so he's known for other things than just being the richest man in the world? Or is
I think he's trying.
Or is he wrestling with himself to work out what he's supposed to do?
I reckon it's the former.
The cynical in me says the former.
Yeah.
Because no one likes him. Nobody likes him.
Oh, there's plenty of articles that talk about how he was.
More people like Trump than they like him.
Well, there's a whole bunch of people that talk about how much of an arsehole he was to work for. The same as Jobs, but no one sits here. But then there's so many articles that talk about how Jobs changed their life and was a visionary leader for them. No one talks about that. It was just he's just a bit of an arsehole to work for.
I wonder if that'll change after he dies.
No, he's going to just disappear.
It's because he doesn't invest in relationships, like you said before.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
Microsoft. So the only thing that will keep like his image going is if Microsoft keeps going. But I don't reckon it will. Have all the money in the world, can't make an impact on it.
That must hurt.
Well, it's like, well, it's interesting that he steps away from the company. You can't. If you really built it, you can never step away from the company. And like he has stepped himself.
He's like
I think
fully away. Yeah,
I think he has no shareholding. I think it's like 1%. It's less than one. It's like 0 point something. Like it's very minimal shareholding.
it's transactional.
It's like the amount of shareholding that a board would make you keep to make sure that you're there for public markets that only know Microsoft as Bill Gates. So like the most logical thing is the shareholding.
Oh, it was one thing for him to step aside as the CEO, and like you can understand that. But the fact that just a couple of years ago he stepped aside as a board member, so he's got absolutely no involvement with the
You
company.
don't need to be a board member.
No.
But he's stepped aside from his shareholding. Like he's out. There's no. He's out, dude. Like there's no like. You can be a shareholder and be a board observer. You don't need to be on the board. I wouldn't want to be on the board at that point. Like I'd be fucking chuffed. But
You'd still be coming back and kicking around and seeing some people
the
and like.
whole thing.
Do you reckon he turns up to
you
the
own
office?
that much
just
of
goes for a
Microsoft
walk?
that long? You wouldn't just give it up. You can't. It's like having an empire, building an empire, and going, all right, I'm going to be a monk, and I'm taking all my gold with me. None of you are allowed to have the gold.
It's not very monkish.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's literally why it doesn't make sense. It's too complex for people to understand. Like, he reminds me of that Scrooge McDuck Was that Rich Duck?
Yeah, Scrooge.
Is it Scrooge?
Yeah.
And he like jumps into the coins and like breaks his back. Like, that's what I remind. That's what
I think that one episode when he's on The Simpsons where he goes and buys out Homer's little internet business that he just started, but doesn't actually buy it out, just goes and takes it over and beats him up. He's like, Simpsons nails it all every time.
But it's like the idea around the pandemic stuff, right? And this is probably the way to finish it sort of up. So I don't think he's ever become his whole self. So if you put the big 5 on him, he's going to be this weird doer personality whose IQ is just like substantial. And he's going to be able to be a linguistic learner as well. Like he's going to have multiple ways of him learning. Like that's this real guy. But one of the most interesting things about it is like the reason everyone's hating him at the moment, right? For investing in pandemics, but like, and there's a whole bunch of things that make it look suspicious. But like the guy was probably just pulling the thread, going, "Well, that doesn't work, and 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 that doesn't work."
I don't think he's an evil guy.
No, and he's adding them all together. He's like, "That doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't work." And then, well, it looks like you've just bought the whole supply chain, but he had to buy the whole supply chain to change it. What he hasn't done though for the last 10 years is tell the visionary story again and again and again. So like, this is why I'm doing it. Complete focus. This is why I'm doing it.
No,
this is why everything else is not working.
I don't think he knows.
The ironic thing is,
he knows.
I don't think
the ironic thing is, we can wrap it up here, is that he understood the pandemic and he probably could have prepared the world for the pandemic, and that would have been his legacy right now.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He just invested in things and made a bit of money out of it.
Maybe.
I reckon he's in a bit of a
maybe
panic
he didn't
state.
move fast enough, and maybe he couldn't see how bad it could get because he's not abstract enough. And then maybe he's just so logical that everything is always a split bet. Which is, if you truly embrace both personalities, you might have to be completely not logical, or illogical is the better way of saying it, which is the chaos side, in order to get the perfect answer. Which is what brings me back to him at school again.
Yeah.
That fucking critical essay, man, would have fucked with his shit. I'm serious.
Yeah, it would have.
I remember I did a whole critical essay about Anchorman. And it was like, review something for satire based off journalism. I'm like, shit. I know every phrase from Anchorman. Yeah. And all teachers care about is
quotes.
Because that's like, oh, you've studied.
Yeah.
Whereas I write this whole thing, I'm like, this title of it was, if Ron Burgundy says it, it's the truth. Which is actually a quote from the movie. But like, I made that all up. I got like 99 in that English assessment, and I pissed off every grammatical nerd.
I did the same exam, and I did frontline.
Yeah. You fucking logical suck up. 2560. You would have been upset because you would have got 90 and I would have got 99.
Frontline's a comedy.
That everyone knows.
Who knows Frontline?
Who puts Anchorman in?
Yeah.
No one is the answer.
Do we need to do archetypes? Not really.
Nah, let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Leave it there.
Good session.
Carl Jung, though, is an indication to our archetypes.
Absolutely.
So if you wanted to follow this on with a conversation about why we build them, that would probably be pretty helpful.
Absolutely.
Next week.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks.